The Bikeriders has been described as Goodfellas on motorcycles by some. And if you couple that with the absolutely stacked cast contained within this film, needless to say, I had pretty high hopes. Unfortunately, I was left feeling more underwhelmed than anything. Let's discuss.
I watch so you don't have to.
Before I get started, I'd like to kindly ask that you hit the like button, and please subscribe to the channel for more content just like this.
Come on. Do it! Do it!
The Bikeriders, directed by Jeff Nichols, follows a Midwestern motorcycle club over the course of a decade, as they evolve from a gathering place for local outsiders into a sinister gang threatening the original group's way of life. Okay, so right off the bat, I have to say that these are always the hardest reviews for me to do. Because when you love something, it's really easy to talk about it. When you hate something, it's really easy to talk about it.
That makes sense.
But when you kind of feel indifferent about something, your brain kind of shuts down and you don't feel all that inspired to talk about things. That being said, I'm going to try to do my best here, and I'll start off by saying this. It is entirely possible that I had my expectations subverted by this film. Now listen, I'm fine with some surprises. I welcome it. I want films to show me something that I've never seen before. But The Bikeriders is one of those instances where they take things in a somewhat unexpected direction, and it's not really done in a way that left me feeling satisfied overall.
How can you not care?
Like this.
Based on the trailer, this looked like a throwback to the hyper-masculine, rebellious, and anti-establishment films of the 60s and 70s. And in some aspects, it is just that. However, I do feel like it's more about deconstructing masculinity than it is showcasing it. Now, deconstruction is something that Hollywood does a lot of these days, and if we're being honest with ourselves, they aren't very good at it. And that's because it's usually coming from a place of ill intentions. And to be clear, I don't necessarily feel like that's where it's coming from with a movie like The Bikeriders. But I'd be lying to you if I said that examining the psyches of these motorcycle gang members in a simplistic way in which it is done in this film really didn't hit home for me like it should have. And bottom line, it's mostly because I didn't feel like it was truly earned. It felt like the film was trying to tell us things rather than showing us and making us feel it.
Put some effort into it!
Now that's just my opinion. Some people might walk out of this movie and get something a bit more profound from it. I just found it to be a lot more basic than I would expect if your goal was to do a series of character studies with this level of talent at your disposal. And for that reason, it is a massive missed opportunity for me. To me, it's the performances of the three lead actors that saved this movie. That being Tom Hardy, Austin Butler, and Jodie Comer. Tom Hardy is being Tom Hardy here. He's cool, he's tough, he looks like he belongs in a motorcycle gang. I do think that this is a much more reserved performance for him than we've seen him do recently, and I mean that in a good way. He's actually quite brilliant at playing this man who has to maintain the image that he's created for himself, while simultaneously dealing with the doubts inside him that come along with this thing that he created growing out of his control.
That's bait.
Austin Butler is great at playing the strong silent type. He is a throwback actor to a bygone era in that aspect. He has very few lines of dialogue, but he does so much with his facial expressions and his body language to bring this performance home. And like Tom Hardy's character, they slowly start to peel back layers so we get to see a different side of him by the end of the film. As for Jodie Comer, she is our window into this world. I don't really have anything bad to say about her overall performance. I mean, she pretty much carries the film. But I'd be lying if I said that her character's voice didn't irk me from time to time. It wasn't nails on a chalkboard bad, but more of a mild inconvenience. I mean, we hear her voice constantly because she basically narrates the film, so that probably didn't help either.
Will you shut up?
Also, shout out to Michael Shannon This is a relatively small part for him, but I think he does the most with his limited screen time. In fact, I think in a movie where a lot of the secondary characters kind of blend together and don't really have any distinguishable characteristics, Michael Shannon's character actually stands out based on his memorable performance. So this story is basically being told through an interview, almost documentary style, hence the narration. And I think my biggest issue with the movie is that unlike documentaries that it's kind of emulating, the movie feels like it's missing crucial parts of the story. I get it, it's supposed to be more about the lifestyle, and a little bit more about the interpersonal relationships between the members. But as the synopsis suggests, I was expecting a little bit more when it comes to them explaining how this club goes from its humble beginnings and turning into this massive crime-infested gang. And we do get a little bit of that transition, but I don't think we get nearly enough. They tell us that the gang is growing. They tell us that things are getting out of control. But I didn't really see it. I didn't really feel it based on what's being shown on screen. The evolution of this gang is quite literally the selling point, and that evolution felt a bit glossed over to me. I wanted to get fully engrossed and fully lost in this world, but in the end it felt more like I was on the outside looking in. I think they needed to fill in some gaps narratively that would have gave you a better sense of how groups like this can turn into something else if they are left unchecked. Also, the movie is desperately trying to sell us on the idea of the brotherhood between these members. But I can't say that I ever really bought into any of the relationships between the men. Outside of maybe Tom Hardy and Austin Butler's characters, but even that relationship felt somewhat one-dimensional.
Not impressed.
Even when a member dies, because of the lack of detail that went into the relationships, I found it very difficult to be invested or impacted by it. As far as the way the film is shot, its structure, its presentation, it very clearly has a strong Scorsese-esque influence. Even the use of music is very reminiscent of how Martin Scorsese makes films. And yet still, some of the film is missing some of that Scorsese flair that it desperately needed. That eye for detail that can turn a somewhat regular scene into something a bit more special. In fact, I can't really think of a signature scene in this movie that really stood out to me.
See, nobody cares.
As for the finale, I think the intensity and the shock does get turned up ever so briefly. And it's done in a Carlito's Way-esque moment that came off as more frustrating to me than anything. It felt like Benny Blanco from the Bronx all over again. And don't get me wrong, I love Carlito's Way. But that ending still bothers me to this day, and the Bikeriders has a very similar moment. Bottom line, on the surface level, it would seem that this movie has everything I could ever ask for when it comes to a memorable cinematic experience. Unfortunately, it wasn't as entertaining or as gripping as I needed it to be to keep me invested the entire time. Which is both a shame and a head scratcher when you consider the talent involved. That's not to say that The Bikeriders is a terrible movie. I thought it was fine. And it may even be one of those movies that I change my mind about over time. But as it stands right now, it just felt like something was missing. Some key elements that would have pushed it over the top instead of just leaving me feeling bored instead. It's a competently made film in some aspects, but if I'm being honest, I felt next to nothing while watching it. And that's why I'm going to give The Bikeriders the Careless Sam Gerard.
I don't care! Y'all be cool. Y'all know.